Shabbat Shalom. Here we are once again. We're studying the Parashat Chukat, Sefer Bamidbar, the book of Numbers. We are starting from chapter 19 and going on to chapter 21, Perek Yud Tet, until Perek Kaf Aleph. In the book of Numbers, Sefer Bamidbar, this portion of the Torah is a very unique portion. If all the portions of the Torah and in the book of Bamidbar, book of Numbers, until here we were referring to the first 2 years of the journey in the desert, in the Midbar. In the book Parashat Chukat, we are transferring 38 years later. We have reached the final year. The final year of 40 years. 40 long years, 40 sad years, when the people of Israel were waiting, or actually awaiting, for the old generation, who were part of the sin of the Meraglim, the sin that we read 2 weeks ago, the sin of the 12 people who went on the journey to explore the land. And due to that sin, the people of Israel were punished that they would not be able to enter Israel. And they had to wait 40 years until all the people over the age of 20 would pass away. And it was very, very, very frustrating to wait and see what's going to happen. Finally, we reached the 40th year. But here in this week's portion, we read some interesting things. First of all, I'll start with chapter 20. ויבואו בני ישראל כל העדה מתברצין בחודש הראשון וישב העם בקדש. The entire people of Israel, the entire community of the children of Israel arrived at the Tzin desert in the first month, and we're in the 40th year. ולא היה מים לעדה, and there was no water. ויקהלו על משה ועל אהרון. And they assembled against Moshe and Aaron. We're in the 40th year. And once again, the children of Israel are complaining. Not only are they complaining, they're assembling exactly the same phrase that was used in last week's portion of the Torah. In the portion of Korach, with that great opposition to Moses, Vayikahalu al Moshe ve'al Aaron. And they assembled against Moses and Aaron. And here again, Vayarev ha'am Moshe, and they're fighting against Moshe. I'm reading chapter 20, verse 3. Vayomru lemor, and they said as follows: V'lu gavanu bigva achenu lifnei Adonai. If only we had died in the death of our brothers before the Lord. And we would expect that in such a case, as we saw before, immediately God should punish the people. What are you fighting against Moses? You didn't learn anything? No. There's no remark. Only Moses and Aaron. As we read in verse 6, Pasuk Vav. Vayavo Moshe ve'Aaron mipnei ha'kahal el petach ohel moed. And Moshe and Aaron moved away from the congregation to the entrance of the tent, and they fell on their faces, and the Lord's glory appeared to them. Vayiplu al pneihem vayira kvod Adonai alehem. That's exactly what happened in last week's portion. And we would expect that right away, immediately, they would get a punishment. No. God has no reference to the people of Israel. He says to Aaron and to Moshe. He says to Moshe, actually, take the staff, assemble the community, and he will bring water from the stone, from the rock. Why is this that when here they are coming and fighting against Moshe and Aaron, this week's parsha, in this week's portion of the Torah, there is no reaction by God of punishment, of attacking the people of Israel? Why do we find here that only Moshe and Aaron felt themselves attacked? And it's interesting, this week's portion, who is those who sinned? It says, God tells Moshe in verse 8, קח את המטה והקל את העדה, אתה ואהרון אחיך, ודיברתם אל הסלע. you and your brother assemble the people and talk to the stone, and it will give water. And give them water. And Moses takes the staff, and he hits the stone, and water comes out. And God says to Moshe and Aaron, in verse 12, "Vayomer Adonai el Moshe ve'el Aharon, Yan lohem antem bi lahakdisheni le'nei bnei Israel." And there are many questions. What exactly is the sin of Moshe and Aaron? There are those who say that because they hit the stone instead of talking to the stone. There are those who say because they were angry at the people and they used, "Now listen, you rebels, Shimuna Hamorim." Or maybe it was because they referred to taking the water out of the stone to themselves, as it says, "And Hamin Hasela Hazen Notzi Mayim." Are we able to extract water from the rock? There are many explanations what the sin is. In this week's portion, the people who sinned are Moshe and Aaron, and the sin was considered a very great sin, to the point where God says to them, "Because you did not believe in me, Yan lohem antem bi, to sanctify me, lehakdisheni, le'enei bnei Israel, in front of the children of Israel, therefore you will not bring this congregation to the land I gave to them. Lachen lo taviu et hakahal hazeh el haaretz asher natati lehem." What was the great sin that they did? Only because they spoke to the stone? They hit the stone instead of speaking to the stone? Why, is that a greater miracle to speak to the stone? Also, we see another interesting question. In the beginning of the book of Dvarim, Deuteronomy, we see that Moses, when he explains why he can't go into Israel, he gives a different reason. I'm talking about the book of Dvarim, Deuteronomy, chapter 1, verse 37. Moses refers to the reason he cannot go into Israel. He says, "Even with me the Lord was infuriated because of you, saying you too shall not enter there. Gam bi hitanaf Adonai biglalchem." And what is he referring to? The sin of the 12 spies. But here in the book of Numbers, in the book of Bamidbar, God explains that he's not letting them go into Israel, not because of the sin of the spies, because of sin over here, that they didn't sanctify his name. So how can we live with this contradiction? I believe that the answer is once again understanding what happened here at the end of 40 years. When we listen to the words of the people, it's interesting. They say to Moses in chapter 20, verse 4, Parakaf Pasuk Dalet, "Velama havetem et hakahal Adonai el hamidbar hazeh." Why did you bring the congregation of God to this desert? Lamut sham, to die. Anachnu uve'irenu, us and our livestock. Velama helitunu mimitzrayim lahaviotanu lamakom hara hazeh. Why did you take us out of Egypt and bring us to this evil place? Lo mekom zera, it's no place of seed. Ute'ena vegefen verimon umayim ein lishtot. Fig and vine and pomegranate and water, there's none here. Moses, when he heard those words, Te'ena gefen verimon, when he heard those words, figs, vines, and pomegranates, immediately, what did he think about? The spies. Moses says to himself, of his greatest nightmares, 40 years, they've been in the desert. Nothing changed. Nothing changed. And he remembers. These were the exact fruits that the spies brought. And Moses immediately falls on his face and he cries. God does not get angry. Because if Moses would listen carefully to what the people are saying, in the past when they complained, they said, we want to go back to Egypt. That's not what they say here. They didn't speak bad about the land of Israel, vice versa. They say, we want to get out of this desert. We would like to go to the land of the fig, the vine, and the pomegranate. They didn't talk bad about the land of Israel. They talked bad about the desert. This is a means of growing up. The people of Israel are saying, here we are ready. We've finished with the desert. We're fed up with the desert. We want to go into Israel. The evil place they refer to here is not Israel, but the desert. And it's interesting. in the rest of this week's portion of the Torah, where we see how we are continuing to go to Israel, it's interesting that we refer to the same names of places that we were at the time of the spies. Kadesh and Kadesh. God, the people of Israel in chapter 21 are fighting the Canaanites. And where do they come to them? It says in chapter 21, verse 3, Vayiten et HaKanani, Vayachrem otam v'tarehem, Vayikra Shem HaMakom Chorma. Right after the sin of the spies, it says that the Jewish people wanted to go up, and God said, don't do it, because you're not ready for that. And they were defeated. At the name of the place was Chorma. Here they are again. But who is in the initiative? The initiative is the people. Vayavo Moshe, Vayavo Bnei Israel, the people of Israel. We even have a poetry in this week's portion. Az Yashir Yisrael. In verse 17 of chapter 21, it says, then Israel sang the song. They're ready to, the initiative is theirs. They're ready without Moses. Moses is the one who's still stuck at the beginning of the 40 years. Yes, when Moses says he's not going into Israel because of the sin of the spies, that's the root of the sin. Moses, in his greatest nightmares, he's always thinking of that. He doesn't realize that the people of Israel are already in a new stage. They're ready to go into Israel. We see that once again at the end of the book of the Numbers, when the two and a half tribes, Gad, Reuven, in chapter 30, in chapter 32, when Gad and Reuven and Menashe come to Moses and they say, we want the land in Jordan. Moses says, oh no, we're going back to the days of the spies. Moses is still there thinking that Jewish people are still stuck in there. God tells him, Moses, you don't realize that these people are not here in an era of miracles, using a stick. The staff was the symbol of miracles. Coming out of Egypt, the staff. In Egypt, the staff with the plagues. The Red Sea, the staff. Miracles. Now it's the time to talk. In Israel, when you want water, you talk to God. You pray to God. Israel is the land, we're not here in the land of miracles, we're a land of talking. But even then, when you get your food naturally, you recognize that it's also from God. God says to Moses, I wanted you to show them that when they're doing things on their own initiative, this is also from God. But Moses was much too holy. He was on a much higher level. He wasn't connected. He didn't realize that the people of Israel had already overcome their sins of 40 years ago. And therefore, Moses didn't go to Israel from the moment he hit the stone instead of talking to it. But the roots of this were from the time of the sin of the spies. And here we are. This week's portion, the beginning of the 40 years, we see that the people of Israel are on a new stage. They are ready to recognize that they have to take the initiative in their own hands. They are ready to recognize that it's not a time of going into Israel, it's not a time of miracles, it's a time of doing things naturally, but recognizing the fact that when you do it naturally, it's also from the hand of God. And that in Egypt we didn't have. In Egypt there's water all the time. You don't need God there, supposedly. Here, the people of Israel are ready to go into the land of Israel. They understand it's their initiative. They don't have to wait for Moses anymore. But Moshe missed out on that moment to teach them the lesson. And there it was proven that Moses cannot be the leader of Israel entering the land of Israel. Shabbat Shalom.